everybody. Today's episode for the Everything Saxophone Podcast is brought to you by Gig Salad, the easiest way for saxophone players to book more gigs. Whether you play jazz, classical, smooth jazz, church music, Gig Salad connects you with event planners across the US and Canada looking to hire live music for weddings, parties, corporate events, anything, you name it. You'll get leads that match your availability, helps you to stand out on Google, and your gig money is guaranteed every time. Now, I use Gig Salad. I've been using it for years now. I really love the service, and I'm so happy that they are sponsoring this episode. What you can do is create your free profile at gigsalad.com and tell them that the Everything Saxophone Podcast sent you. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Everything Saxophone Podcast. Donna Schwartz, your host here. Today, I have a really, really special guest. It's Dr. David Cutler. Now, this is going to be incredibly interesting for all musicians because we're going to be talking about his latest book called The Savvy Musician 2.0. And there is so much in this book that is relevant to anybody who's a performing musician. I'm reaching out to especially my performing musician friends who have CDs out, who want to get more exposure. I'm reaching out to my musician teacher friends who are stuck in that trap of, teaching a whole bunch of students and not charging what you're worth. I'm also talking to my university friends that teach in universities. There's stuff in here for you as well. There's stuff for everybody in this book. David, I'm so glad to have you on the podcast.
Well, it's a pleasure to speak with you. I've admired you for a while, and I'm glad to have this conversation. Thank you for your kind words.
Oh, no, and it's not even kind words, it's the truth, okay? Because this book is packed. But before we get to the book, I want people to know about you. So I'm curious, if you could tell us about your background, when you got started in music, and then we're going to lead it up into what made you decide to, create this book.
Well, I can't actually remember what happened first, music lessons or my mom yelling at me. but I started classical piano lessons at a very early age. But even back then, I was very serious, but I was not like the other kids. So I'd be playing my Mozart and just, mixing up a bit to make it better. I would change the notes and the rhythms and all those things. I'm not quite sure it did, but beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. So my mom was not happy about that. And she would bark at me, David, that's not what it says. David, play what's on the page. David, you're doing it wrong. But what she didn't yet realize was that whether because of an inherent need to be creative or maybe just a really short attention span, something inside of me just had to find my own voice. And so it was those inclinations that ultimately led me towards both jazz and composition, two places where creativity was not only tolerated, but expected. And so it was really interesting growing up with these two very different traditions that teach such different lessons, even though they're both working with music. From classical, I really learned about attention to detail and having an ironclad work ethic, making a plan. From jazz, it was like, take this thing and make it unlike anyone else. Walk the tightrope, take a risk, those things. And so that really informed my whole worldview as I got older.
Yeah, and you know what? In thinking about your book too, you address this as well. So okay. Piano background, I saw also the press pictures as well, you doing some crazy stuff when you're performing. So talk me through like high school and, college and all that kind of thing, playing piano, being in all these different types of groups and stuff.
I mean, there were some great experiences that really shaped me. I wound up living after my undergrad, I wound up living in Europe for a while.
Oh, wow.
And I lived in Vienna. And so I was really excited to be in this city where so much great music had been created. And I wanted to play, Beethoven and Mozart did so many things there. And so, Schoenberg, and nobody wanted to hear me play it. They said, David, you're American. Now that's interesting. Play us some American music. And I have to admit, Donna, I had no idea before that being American was interesting. Because here it was just like, everyone was American. Being from somewhere else, that was the interesting thing.
Yeah.
So I look back, and at that point, on the jazz side, I could play a lot, but on the classical side, I knew maybe Gershwin and Leonard Bernstein, maybe Scott Joplin, and that was about it. So that really made me think about what does it mean to be an American musician? What is our unique identity and what does the world need from us? Another, story that happened after that, I went off to get a master's degree, which I thought was uh, my culminating degree at the time. And I remember going to a mentor, someone who we would spend hours upon hours poring over musical problems. Right before I graduated, I said, I got one more question for you and then I'll leave you alone. So, what should I do with my life?
Oh, there you go. Wow.
And for the first time, this is like at the best music school, a very famous teacher. For the first time, I saw this thing, a blank stare. And the advice I got, he said, David, I don't know what to tell you. I'm sure you'll be fine. It was completely devastating. So, at that moment, I started looking around, and it seemed to me at that time that classical music was dead, jazz was irrelevant. My whole life had been a lie. So I didn't know what else to do. So I participated in a ritual known to most music school graduates. I moved back home with my parents and locked myself in a room and sulked for a while. That was a really hard period, but it helped me figure out who I needed to become.
Here's the thing, though. You're saying it helped you to figure out who you needed to become. For many people, they don't figure that out. They
Yeah.
really don't. And it is, and we're laughing a little bit here, but this is the truth. We were talking before we started, doing this recording that I'm a child of the 80s, people a child of the 90s, 2000s. There's so many more opportunities out right now. And, back then you performed or you taught, I mean, yeah, there were certain other things you could be involved with, music industry and whatnot, but there's so many other opportunities that we're going to talk about in a few minutes. But when you said, you asked your teacher, so now what do I do with my life? Yeah, that was the answer. It wasn't just for
Yeah.
you. That was the answer. And it's so interesting because I remember I went to good schools, but you know, we learned music. We learned how to perform. I'll never forget, and it wasn't until I got my second master's in music ed with Michael Philip Mossman,
Oh, yeah.
great trumpet player and great arranger. He taught us music business. Queens College finally had like a music business class, and that was one of the best things that one of the best classes I've ever taken. He changed our mindset about things. And the first question that I'm going to
Amazing.
have for you, when it comes to, yeah, I'm going to go out of order what I was initially thinking. The mindset of an entrepreneur as a musician. See, this is a thing where, I've come across people that they either think I'm just a performer or I'm just a teacher, or maybe I do both, but they haven't wrapped their minds around being an entrepreneur.
Mm.
Can we talk about that and the
Sure.
importance of that, especially now?
It's interesting because entrepreneur sounds very businessy, and a lot of business schools want to own entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
But in truth, a lot higher percentages of musicians wind up becoming entrepreneurs than business folks who wind up working in a corporation or something like that. That's what a freelancer is. That's what an independent music teacher is. But there's a great book, an old book called E-Myth Revisited. Have you heard of this?
Yes, I actually
By
started
Michael
listening to it.
Gerber.
Yeah.
And the idea, the E-myth is the entrepreneur myth. And the myth is that entrepreneurs start businesses. And of course, there are examples of entrepreneurs that do start businesses. Every once in a while I meet someone, what do you want to do? I want to become an entrepreneur. Great. What kind of business? I don't know. I don't know, something, right? They love the art of making a business, and it doesn't really matter what they do. That happens some of the time, but the myth is that that's usually what happens. But in truth, it is much more often a technician. Someone plays the saxophone and then they say, I'm really good at the art. I know I should have a career doing this thing. And it turns out that being a good saxophonist and having a successful career are not the same thing. They take a different set of skills. That said, uh, I think musicians make great entrepreneurs because so many of the things that we've learned in music can directly translate to your business or to have creating value in the world. And that was actually after my existential crisis, my one idea coming out of it, which is, can I take lessons from music and apply it to other areas of life? Like, I knew how to be passionate about practicing. Could I be passionate about personal finance? I knew how to arrange a tune. Could I arrange a marketing campaign?
Wow.
And so it turns out all those things I was talking about, attention to detail, taking risks, all those things are really important to an entrepreneurial lifestyle too. So actually, musicians make great entrepreneurs. I'll just say one other thing. Have you heard this? We talk about starving artists,
Yes. Yeah.
and there is this perspective I've heard that musicians are bad at money. I have never really experienced that. In my, from what I've seen, most musicians are amazing at money. The problem is we just don't have enough of it, right? We don't know how to create that kind of wealth. But because maybe we're bootstrapping all the time, we can get way more out of a dollar than most businesses can, which are just throwing money away head over heel, right? And so if we could just learn to keep our frugality, but then grow our bottom line, we can actually do quite well.
What a great point. That is so true. When you think about it, and I know this too from the stuff that I do as well, a few things here. Number one, musicians, the attention that we have to have, the attention to detail, the work ethic, the
Yeah.
the grit, right? The constant grit, constant working. Those are all the elements, many of the elements that are required to be a successful business person. And that's why musicians can succeed at this. And people
Yeah.
don't realize it. There's this, you mentioned the myth of the starving artist. It's this myth that's thrown at us, just like the myth that what I was told, those who can't, teach, right? That's when I was growing up. That was the big thing. And so if you believe that, you become that. So if you believe that musicians are supposed to be starving artists, you become that. If you believe that musicians are only supposed to be paid with pizza and beer, you're going to become that, and you're going to keep perpetuating that horrible belief, that misinformation. And it's interesting because it's not the musicians that are perpetuating that. It's society. It's the society that doesn't pay musicians what they should be paying them. They say, oh yeah, sure, we'll just pay you pizza and beer. And meanwhile, what you should be saying, well, are you paying your chef?
Yeah.
Are you paying your staff? Are they getting paid pizza and beer?
Well, there are definitely, societal issues, and it's hard to change culture. It's really
Yeah,
hard to change culture. But there are also mindsets. I mean, that was a word that you used that are instilled upon us.
yeah,
One of the things that I realized in classical training, I love playing classical music, and I loved so many things about that. Jazz is a little different question, or rock is a little different question. But in classical music, not only aren't we taught to innovate, but we are taught to not innovate, right? Our whole worldview is here's the answer key, right? Here's a score by a great creative genius. That is not you, by the way, right? That came up with all the right notes and rhythms and dynamics and articulations. And your job is to recreate in the most literal way their vision. And if there is room for you to make a decision, it is minor tinkering around the edges rather than bold reimagination. So when that's your whole training, it transfers to the way we view it. Well, I guess this is the life of a musician. I guess this is how we have to be. And I can do a little bit of drawing here, a little coloring here, but to think of a radically different model, that's not part of the model. And so that's one of the things I think about. How can you take these lessons from one genre and apply it to another, or from one way? That's what was so great about jazz. It's like, no, here's the starting point, right? Maybe the starving artist, that's where you start, but now you got to write your own story. You got to figure out what you want to become.
You know, this is interesting because I was just off of a conversation with somebody, and for a lot of people that are returning to music, and it's, they're going to community bands, right? They're playing music for fun, which is awesome, which is great. What I find interesting though is that there's this level of comfort of playing the written music, and there's this massive fear of improvisation, massive fear of being creative. And I think that plays into this too, to be honest with you.
And it's the same thing with, it's much easier when you look at a career, just like when you look at a piece of music, when you look at your career model, it's much easier to say, well, I guess this is, the tried and true, this is the path that we are supposed to take, as opposed to composing your own. But one of the things that I've learned from interviewing hundreds and hundreds of musicians and talking to people, there are two kinds of people, two kinds of musicians. There are those who see 100 things that they could do with their life. And then there are those who see maybe one or two or maybe zero things they could do with their life. But you never meet someone with 7 ideas. It's never happened in the history of the world, because either opportunity is everywhere or opportunity is nowhere, or almost nowhere. And there's no in between. But once you start to look at the world, which is a learnable skill, a lot easier than learning to play the instrument. Once you start looking at the world as a place of opportunity, all of a sudden you can spot these things everywhere you look. And then the bigger decision is, which one do you pursue? Because you can't do them all.
Yeah, that's very true. And, at least you can't do them all, right away. In time, you could start to, tick things off or whatever. But it's a very interesting concept what you're talking about in terms of classical music. And, and I'm just gonna say this, like, schools train us to conform, right? There may be jazz bands in schools, that's great, that's awesome. Not all schools, but they train us to conform, read the music, read the music, read the music. You go to college, if you're going for a music degree, read the music, read the music. If you're going for a jazz degree, it's getting a lot better. Obviously that, they want creativity, but, we do have to conform. And it's, in today's age, we need to know the rules, but we need to break the rules, because things are changing. We spoke about this too, before we officially recorded. Things have changed so much since COVID, from before COVID and after COVID, right? I mean, that's going to be in the history books. It's going to be crazy, right? But, and even after COVID, with AI, so many things have changed, right? In this last, I'm going to say year, right? We're recording this, into the year 2025, AI has exploded, and there's tremendous possibilities for this. There's also tremendous resistance to it as well. But but the mindset has to, I think the important thing too, that we're also talking about for musicians, is having that open mindset and allowing yourself to be able to adapt, because there's going to be, especially for performing arts, there's going to be a lot of adaptation when it comes to AI and stuff. I don't think in your book you talking about AI, because I don't think it was as explosive, as it is like now in the last, few months of this year. But what do you see, what do you see the effects of AI happening, when it comes to, this is a very broad question, I understand that. So I have to pare it down to maybe creating music, maybe creating music and getting music out there.
Well, first of all, there are some passages on AI in the book. When you look through the history, certainly the last 100 years, I mean, the rate of change is getting faster and faster. And we're seeing our disruptions being disrupted. And every time it happens, there's a new technology, and people say, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. But what really happens, it does change things, and it does crown new winners and losers. And I don't mean that in like a name calling way, but just in terms of success. And so we have seen every time that there is a major shift in the landscape, early adopters tend to be rewarded for that. And there are definitely people that can create full career models by embracing whatever the new technology is, or whatever the issue is at the moment. I mean, what I had to stop doing in the book, you mentioned COVID, because of when I was writing some of it, is there are lots of vignettes throughout the book where I talk about a principle and then I interview someone that has a story about that and brings it to life and goes way deeper and came up with something way more amazing than I ever could. And one of the consistent things I found in interviewing people was that they discovered this opportunity because of COVID. Like they could have done it anytime, but it required COVID to shift their thinking. And I know for a lot of us as musicians, it's just, I remember someone said about COVID that when it hit, about 30% of people couldn't get out of bed. We had, and I don't mean to, by the way, diminish any of the really horrible things that happened during COVID.
No, sure.
But, so 30% of people couldn't even get out of bed. They couldn't figure it. Life was over. 10% of people were leaning into it. They're like, this has to be a defining moment in my life. And then the other 60% were just waiting for someone to tell them what to do.
Yeah.
Right? What do at this moment, I need instructions. I need my classical music score to tell me exactly where I need to go from here.
Yeah.
But it was incredible talking to so many musicians who said that this helped them think in a different way that led to a new opportunity. And I ultimately had to stop writing those stories because I didn't want the book to date in 30 seconds.
Right, right. No, that's true. And it's interesting because I've had the podcast since 2018. Started with Nick Manella, and
Yeah.
then I took it over. And just the changes that I've seen, but also with all the people that I've interviewed, both music industry, educators, and as well as artists. It was the artists that I think some of them really, really embraced this, and they really took advantage of technology. And I think they pushed technology too,
Yeah.
to the point where they were creating all these different types of performance videos. Uh, Perfect person, Michael Linkton. Michael Linkton is an amazing saxophone player. He's located out here in Southern California. Love him. He's a great player, great player. But he just went to town with this. And I always knew about this platform called Stage It. I've known about this since I lived in New York, and early people like Annie DeFranco and some other people really took advantage of it. Now, what is Stage It? Stage It is basically a platform where you perform online, you perform for an audience. The audience pays you, what they can. I think they changed the payment plans now, but like people would, you're playing for tips, but you're reaching people all over the world. And these Stage It performances are like a live performance. They're not recorded, so you can buy them afterward. Okay, but the point of the Stage It thing was that you could reach audiences that you maybe never were able to reach before. So Stage It got insanely popular during COVID, and Michael Linkton really took the bull by the horns with this, and he started off figuring it out. And he would put on weekly shows, basically more contemporary jazz, and he got better and better. His equipment got better and better. He got sponsors to the point where he was getting sponsors giving him like these cameras valued at $10,000 each,
Wow.
And his Stage It performances became real shows, real productions. And what he did, which was really smart, he put on these shows, he taught a course on how to do this, right? Another opportunity came from that. And he won an award. He won an award from Stage It for his performances. So that's someone that really, just an incredible example. I'll always keep mentioning that to people because that's someone who, no more playing, especially in California. They really shut things down here. It was really tough. He had to do something, and this is what he did. And it was, I just admire him so much for that.
Great. And you could have a parallel story to that for any technology. So you asked about AI. Hopefully AI can help make us a lot more efficient in what it is we do to solve problems, so we can spend more time maybe making music. It can help us figure out different ways to define our value and those kinds of things. There are opportunities now in training people to use AI. And your last example, I love this. As musicians, and this is something we learned through COVID and we can learn again with AI, it's interesting to think about in COVID, what we couldn't do, right? We can't give you a shot. We can't take care of you if you get sick. But what can we do? We can tell a story. We can connect to people. We can build empathy and those kinds of things. And so I love what I just learned from your story is there's an opportunity to actually help celebrate what AI is doing and to become an advocate for AI companies. If you want to, there are professional opportunities there. So you can look at it about 20 different ways
Yeah.
if that's part of your story.
Yeah. And so here's the other thing too. So here's the next question that I had too. One of the things that people get confused about as musicians is marketing. There's another myth that's out there, like marketing is dirty. Uh, how do I want to describe this? It's like selling out, marketing. It's, oh, it's a bad like taste in people's mouth. The thing is that you're marketing all the time. Whether you have a new record out or not, you're marketing. Marketing is essentially trying to promote yourself, or to be able to get something for yourself, right? So for marketing for musicians, let's talk about this. And number one, how it's changed. We could say before COVID, after COVID, but even way before COVID. I'm talking like since the 2000s up to now. And why is it important to think about marketing as a musician? And a musician, I'm going to use this as a broad term to describe performers and teachers, and also people that are in, are what do you call it, self-employed, but also in the industry as well. So like, let's talk about marketing for musicians and how to look at this and how to approach it.
When you talk about these different groups, in some ways they're very distinct from one another. And in some ways, everything is the same, right?
Yeah.
Selling a computer or a saxophone or a piece of cheese or, self-service, it's all the same, right?
Yeah.
You're offering value to people. I picked up on one very specific thing you said, which was this idea that marketing is selling out. That if you're spending time promoting what it is that you do, that you're selling it out. And I just have to say, I see it exactly the opposite way. If you have quality art to offer as a performer, for example, and nobody hears it, you are selling out the art, you are selling out the world, because you have value to offer and you're not getting it to people. So my hope for anyone who's listening is, please sell out. Sell out your next product, sell out your teaching offerings, sell out your concert. That is the goal. Sell it out, which means you have to think about it. So what is marketing? What is marketing? I asked lots of groups, what is marketing? And what, in a word, what is marketing? What would you say? What is marketing?
Well, for me,
I'm
marketing is
quizzing the
promotion.
host.
Yeah. No, this is good.
Right?
For me, marketing is promotion.
Speak it out loud. Marketing is promotion. Sometimes people will say marketing is advertising. Marketing is sales. Those are the most common things I hear. From my perspective, in a word, marketing is everything. It's all marketing. Your shirt that you're wearing right now is marketing. Having a good tone quality, as in that great mic that you have in front of you, is the way you're presenting yourself. That is marketing. Meeting a person is marketing. So I think the first thing to think about, marketing is complicated and involves a lot of different things. The problem was when people look at it as marketing is advertising or is promotion, they tend to think about social media. They tend to think about print advertisement. They tend to think about those things, and they might be, they're usually a part of every marketing effort, but that is not the entirety of marketing. So let's talk a little more holistically about it, in no particular order. And I actually have a whole system on this that's introduced in one chapter of Savvy Musician 2.0. I call it the Arts Marketing A-List, which talks about, business schools, they talk about the 5 Ps of marketing, and I think they're really outdated, and product and price and those kinds of things. So I'm introducing here Arts Marketing A-List. We won't go through all of them, but the first one is the art itself. Just because you're playing music doesn't mean that people need that product or you're offering lessons. So one thing you might want to think about in a marketing campaign is, do people even want this? Every great entrepreneurial venture starts with a problem. What is the problem you're trying to solve? And if the problem I'm trying to solve is, I want to make a living, nobody's going to say, well, I want to pay money to help you solve making a living, right? That would be like Home Depot say, you should come to us because we want to make money. I mean, of course, you need to make a living, but that is not a compelling value proposition. When I say, I'm playing a concert of pieces that I've loved for many years, that's fantastic, but not particularly compelling. So is this helpful we could do it about teaching or anything, but let's just talk about performance.
Yeah.
So it's important to think about, why do people even go to a performance in the first place? And, it used to be, sometimes people say, well, people go to concerts for the music, and they might, me and you, and maybe like one other guy in a green hat or whatever it is, but if we want to hear music, if our main objective is to hear music, we can listen to any perfectly edited and mastered and mixed music on our phone, just without leaving the house and braving traffic and paying for parking and all those things. Why do we need to go to a concert to do that? So while listening to music is one reason, there are more people. I'm not saying this is right or wrong. I'm saying this is the world in which we live.
Yeah.
People go to concerts for other reasons. Maybe it's social. Maybe it's it's a must-see activity. Something is going to happen there. I want to be part of this thing. I have a friend, a saxophonist. See, I'm going to say this, and now he has to do it. He has such a great idea, but he hasn't done it yet. He lives in Charleston, South Carolina. And his idea is, I want to get in the Guinness Book of World Records for having the most people dancing the Charleston at one time in Charleston, which I think is amazing. People would pay money to become part of that, to get in the Guinness Book of World Records, which incidentally is currently held by London.
Oh, okay. Okay, no, he's got to do something about this.
Got to do something, but having an idea and doing it are not the same thing. So no pressure, Jack, for that. So, people go to concerts for all kinds of reasons. They go to be seen. They go to, see a celebrity. So first thing is to figure out whatever your product is to figure out what is the important problem that I'm trying to solve. So that's one part of it. Another thing is audience. As musicians, we are way too uncreative when it comes to identifying audiences. So in many cases, in the classical music world, a lot of people, when you ask people, and in jazz, it's similar, but you ask people, well, who's your audience? And well, sometimes they'll say, well, the usual, other musicians and my parents and old white people, something like that, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you'll ask people, who is the audience? And they'll say this thing like, you should be so proud of them. And they'll say, everyone.
Right.
Like, let me give you a pat on the back. You are so ambitious. Everyone is a synonym for no one. When you try to be all things to all people, you will be nothing to nobody. And so, how can you possibly market to everyone, right? There are 8 billion people on the planet. They're not all going to come to your show. And then there are those folks that get really creative and they say, I want to go after the non-traditional audience. Who's that? I never met a non-traditional. Does anyone wake up in the morning and say, I'm feeling so non-traditional today?
Yeah,
they go into the non-traditional social media platforms. Like, how do you find a non-traditional? Of course, everyone's traditional for something, just maybe they haven't historically cared about the thing that you do.
Yeah.
So what I find is so often when we design products as musicians, and I use business terms, but we produce something, right? That's what we do.
Yeah.
The audience is either other musicians or, kids, something like that. And those are 2 great audiences. But to have a powerful product or a powerful business idea, you have to know not only what you stand for, but what you don't. And if you can say, this is what we don't do, then all of a sudden, it's probably going to be very successful. So not only knowing who is your audience, but who isn't your audience. I'll tell you one thing I failed in the book. I wanted to find an audience. I wanted to find an example of a musician, and the criteria was they could play any instrument, any style of music, live anywhere on the globe, who designed a concert program specifically geared towards doctors or lawyers or something like that.
Okay.
This was the one story I couldn't do it. Now, of course, doctors are welcome to anything, but it seems like the world's a pretty big place. If you have a concert that anyone could come to, a doctor might come and they probably won't come. But if you design an offering specifically for the medical field, right? Maybe you play the same great music that you do, but you frame it in a certain way, or maybe you somehow connect what it is. Maybe you just talk about the medical challenges that the composers had along the way, or whatever it is, but to present it in a way that's relevant and targeted to them. Here is a concert for doctors. How are they going to not go? It is way easier to sell out a concert for 500 people geared towards doctors than geared towards everyone. And so and that is marketing. So by not choosing an audience or by not being creative about our audience, we are just closing doors. So that's why I would say, yeah, maybe they're related to promotion, but first you got to figure out who you're going to promote to, what is the art you're making, who is the audience going to be, and why will they care? What problem are you solving for them?
Okay, let me interject for a second.
Please.
Wow, this is really good. And actually, you're giving me a different perspective too, because I also perform as well. And we all say, hey, I'm playing at Disneyland. Come on down. And it's like, wow, that's really compelling. Everybody's going to want to show up now. No, they're not. That's the whole thing. But there is one person that perhaps can fit, you say you may have failed at this. This guy, Tiamo.
He's in the book.
He is in the book. All
Yeah,
right,
but for a different story. He does keynote concerts. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah, I was going to say the keynote concerts. I'm thinking to myself, he's kind of doing that in a sense, but it's more corporate, like reaching out to corporations and stuff, and all the businesses. But yeah, let me hear your perspective on this. This is interesting.
What on Tiamo or?
Yeah, on Tiamo, because I was thinking that he would fit the bill for for specific audiences. Like he says to songwriters, you're going to reach out to certain groups and you're going to write songs for them, and you're going to do a keynote concert. You're going to speak also.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting about this, I'm not saying this is right. I'm just saying this is the way the world is. In our world today, we value music here and we value public speakers here.
Yeah, wow.
This is just the reality. So many musicians speak at their gigs. Now, there are musicians that don't, right? And so I'm not talking to you in this particular thing, but a lot of musicians talk during their concerts. But for better or worse, the world we live in values musicians who speak here, musicians who don't speak here, musicians who speak here, and speakers who play music way up here. Because most speakers just wah, 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 like a Charlie Brown adult, they just talk and talk and talk. But if you're going to hear someone give a speech and then all of a sudden they break out a guitar or a saxophone or something, that's interesting. That's different from every other lecture that I heard. And so Tiamo is an example, and I have two examples of public speakers. His was to show something different, to show how he was different from other public speakers, and to compare, show his value proposition compared to every other speaker's value proposition. I went to a Speakers Bureau website, and so they listed all these different speakers, all the way up to the Bill Clintons, or people that make a lot of money, but that's not most of us. And then at the bottom end, they would have people that you've never heard of, right? That would give a 45-minute keynote. And they didn't have exact prices, but they had kind of ranges of prices. What do you think the bottom price was? Like for the cheapest 45-minute keynote that you can get for someone you've never heard of before? Where does the scale start?
I'm not sure. I'm gonna guess like 3,000.
That would be, most musicians would salivate at 3,000. Actually, this was 5,000. You got pretty close. Sometimes I hear people say $500, $700, and which brings us to another point. What we consider a lot of money as musicians and what a lot of the rest of the world considers as a lot of money, we're on two totally different playing fields, right? And so sometimes we are our worst enemy because we totally undervalue what it is that we do. And we don't view it like this is a $5,000 product, or whatever your scale is, a $20,000 product. So money is not everything, but money is important if you want to make life work. You want to, have a mortgage or eat lunch every once in a while. And something else that I think a lot of musicians don't realize, this is kind of maybe a secret, but did you know that to non-musicians, musicians are interesting? Right? Now, to musicians, I'm fascinated by your talking lines, but if we met in a Target or something like that, let's say it's somewhere else. If we met at a music conference and I'm like, what do you do? And you're like, I'm a musician. Oh, I'm a musician too. I can't believe, everyone's a musician. It was just like me being an American here in America.
Right.
It's just normal. It's not that interesting, but everything is contextual. But for a lot of people, including a lot of people that make a lot of money, but hate their jobs, they look at a musician and they say, you get to do the thing that you love, which is what motivates so many of us as musicians. That's interesting. Of course, everyone likes music. So if you can frame what you do in the right way as an exclusive product, in some cases, maybe, that can really motivate a different kind of clientele than if you're, say, well, play it, just take any $100 gig and just keep doing that for the next 10 years.
Yeah. Okay. Oh my gosh. There's so much here. You know, you mentioned, and I talk about this often, and I talk about this with a lot of people about undervaluing what we do. But here's the other thing too. Wouldn't you agree though that we're also fighting against, social norms and social beliefs about what musicians should be getting paid? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not talking about the top, like a Taylor Swift. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about people going out to dinner and there's music in the background.
Yeah, there are societal norms, but we also can control a lot of that story. What I love, since you mentioned Tiama, one of the things I heard him say before is he would write a song, and it might be a three-chord song, but a customized song. He was doing this for a while. And people would say, how much does it cost? I don't know. He would throw out, he's $10,000 or whatever. And it was so expensive. People would be like, wow, this must be good. I guess I better go with this because it's cost so much. And his main value proposition was, I'm just charging infinitely more than anyone else. And so we can have a lot to do in terms of the way that we package what it is we do and we present it. In a culture where the norm is, you play background music at a restaurant and it's just like the wallpaper, that's what you're going to do. Society will probably value it in the way that it currently does. But there's a lot more that you can do than that. So it's like when you said, I said, well, you can't decide which project to do. And you said, well, maybe you can do all of them. Well, life is short in a way. And so one of the things that I think a lot about, and I've thought increasingly about, because time management is such a big issue for musicians,
Yeah.
is not just time management, not just getting the most out of your minutes, but project management. And by that, I don't mean getting your projects done, but I mean choosing projects, getting the most out of each project, and choosing projects that are most likely to help you move towards success, whatever it is that means to you. So if success involves, reaching certain income thresholds or impacting certain audiences in certain ways, to think very strategically about it and design your entrepreneurial ventures, design your business ideas with that in mind. And sometimes you have to put some investment, not only financial investment, but time investment, trying to think about, what is a concert idea in this case, or an event idea that is really going to resonate with a certain audience. And that's what most public speakers do, incidentally. I read a book, this would bore me to death, but I read a book on public speaking and it said, develop one talk, just one talk, but make that talk perfect. And then you can deliver it and know that all the jokes will hit and all those kinds of things. And in music too, I don't think any of us want to just play the same show all of our life, but to design something that's really high quality, but instead of just doing it once and then learning a new show and then doing that and then learning a new show, really polishing it, making sure that the transitions are there, then it really speaks to your audience and that that you're going to get people really excited no matter where you go. That could be a great project.
And with that project, though, as musicians, adaptable musicians, having flexibility, like a template almost, having this template that that's going to work. I mean, when you're performing, there's usually, people think about their set list and, what works great for the audience, right? So that's kind of a template there, and they're just choosing the songs that are going to fit that template. But this is more than that. And the one point I just want to do a quick recap before we go on, that's really hitting home for me too. If you treat I don't care if you're playing in a weekend band, but if you treat music as a business, right, and think about who you want in that audience and who you don't want, because sometimes it's more important to know who you don't want than who you do want, and that's a big thing in business. But understanding, what the audience wants, I think that's going to really pay dividends. And I keep thinking about like the story you said with like, just doing a concert for doctors. And that's something that is radically different than what and I can see this now, than what Tiamo does. It's a different kind of field for sure. But treating what you're doing. We're talking performance right now, but this goes for everything. But treating what you're doing as a business. And you know what? I wanted to track back on one thing too. You mentioned that public speakers are valued much more highly than musicians. And even musicians that speak, okay, but I do want to say this though, and this is a big pet peeve of mine. When bands are performing and they announce the people in the band, or they start talking, and you have no idea what they're talking about because they're mumbling into the microphone, and it's like they're assuming that we can understand their fast talking mumbling, that it's cool. They're musicians, so it must be cool. That's one thing that drives me absolutely bananas, because the thing is that you're going to get people in the audience that don't know you and maybe want to know who the bass player is. And if we speak more clearly and with not only clearly, but also with some sense of passion about it, maybe tell a story about the person, I think that would also really help that particular performance. It's just a pet peeve of mine. I was just thinking about that when you're talking about musicians who speak. And then I'm thinking about how when people are introducing the band members or telling stories, they're not speaking in such a way that delivers the idea clearly enough.
Musicians who mumble. And I love that, you use the word template. And I would just encourage people to, and I think what you're saying is right. You were talking about the set list as a template. I encourage people to go one level higher and think about the template of the concept in itself, because when someone goes to a show, then they're experiencing it in the moment. And if they're a great experience, they might go to the next one. If they don't, they might not. But to get someone there the first time, they don't actually know what they're going to experience.
Right.
So it's the promise of what will be there. And so another part actually of the arts marketing A-list, to go back to that, is the angle. And angle is about, being buzzworthy. Can you create a concept? If you can get people to talk about what it is that you're doing at the dinner table, ticket sales will come, right? So, and to create buzz, and there are a lot of different ways to create buzz around a concept. It could be the art itself. It could be something that's super unusual about the way that the art is being constructed. It could be the story, like all of them are being played on instruments that are made out of corn. Okay, that's crazy, and maybe it's for farmers, right? It's at a state fair or something like that. That's super interesting, right? Or it could be the story behind it. Well, when this group, they were all in combat, and they're all, and that's where they met, something like that. or it can be even the campaign itself sometimes can be the buzzworthy thing. I think of Geico, whatever, where their commercials have nothing to do with the with insurance at all, but they just have a cute animal whose name sounds kind of like their name, and they've made this whole, but it gets people talking, right?
True.
So what is the promise? Anyway, what is the big idea behind your concert? And if that's there, the bullets are important, and they make and the way you talk to an audience is important, but none of it matters unless you get people there in the first place.
Right. Right. That's the problem, and it's not only for performing, it's also for promoting records,
Yeah.
and it's the streaming services that only, really um, value people on a Taylor Swift level, compared to a lot of jazz musicians who don't barely make anything from the streaming too. I mean, we got that whole thing going on. So what you're talking about, it's not even just for live performances too, but it's also, what makes this album interesting? What makes this album stand out? What makes me want to listen to it?
Yeah, and really, all these things are kind of the same. I'm thinking about. I actually had one great story. I'm trying to think about how I can talk about this. That I can't give away who this person is, or I'll be
Okay.
in trouble. But I had an amazing story for the book, and this one person asked me to not put it in the book, so I couldn't put it in the book.
Oh,
So I put another story in the book. But here's what I was looking for, and it goes to recordings. I wanted to, because we've all talked about, the new streaming model. This is another thing that, it doesn't fairly reward musicians. And yet there are musicians besides Taylor Swift who make a lot of money from recordings. But in order to do that, you got to get a lot of people to listen. So usually when I'm looking for a story, I have a concept in mind, and then I try and find someone who kind of can demonstrate that. So I had this idea. I wanted to have a story that focused on a musician who nobody knew the name, or who a not famous musician, but who has gotten millions and millions of streams because of the content of kind of the function of the music that they played. I don't know how I can tell this story without giving it away. But
okay.
anyway, I found this player. Maybe I won't tell you the genre, but I thought, what about if there's someone who has created really awesome music for babies,
Okay.
and found this artist who had done it and it was like really well done, and it was, it wasn't like avant-garde. That's probably not what you would play for your babies, but so well done. A lot of music that's for kids is put together with like three synthesizers, and it's cheap music. It's just not, doesn't have, and this was so sophisticated, perfect, and beautiful, and I guess this artist got a lot of backlash from other musicians, because they said that word that you said, that he had sold out,
Yeah.
because he was selling out and making so much money, but it was beautiful music. He said, personally, I'm really proud of this, but the social media machine turned on me, And so anyway, this person didn't want to be included. I won't say much more about that. But the point is that you found a need, in a world that is oversaturated with music. There's no shortage of recordings out there.
Yeah.
And yet there is a good shortage of recordings that I can play for my baby that are a little bit sophisticated and beautiful, and that's a market to tap into. So I wound up doing another story featuring a cellist who did meditative music and has
Oh,
also done quite well.
yeah.
Um, because again, nobody knew who this musician was except for the people that he knew, but because it had a function. That's not the only way to, the only strategy to promote an album, but it is certainly one. If they're not going to search for your name, maybe they'll search for this kind of value.
That is profound, and that is great and brilliant on that cellist's part when you think
Yeah,
about that. Because
yeah.
when you think about this, right, cellist who plays meditative music, it fits a need. How many places, how many massage places are out there? How many yoga places are out there, who need different styles of music? Because when you go to get a massage, you hear the same stuff over and over
Yeah,
again. It's the same kind of thing. But wouldn't it be interesting to have something a little different that
yeah.
can still fit the same realm, but and it relax you, but not be the same stuff, over and over again? That's smart. That's really
And
smart.
and I guess, to tie it to what we were talking about earlier, the thing about writing meditative music not only is that you know what it is, but you know what it isn't. Just like having a concert for doctors, you know who the audience is and who the audience isn't. So maybe that can be one of the takeaways from this interview is figure out what you stand for and what you don't stand for. Right? If you can't tell me what you don't do that 97% of the competition does, it's going to be very hard to have a compelling message.
But also, it's going with this, figuring out what you stand for and what you don't stand for. It's also having the courage to stand up for what you stand for.
Yeah,
Because if it goes against the norms, you need to have a pretty thick skin.
that's true. That's true. And the moment, when you're not successful, nobody cares. But when you are successful, then all of a sudden people come
Right.
after you. So you have to have that kind of thick skin. But we need thick skin for a lot of things in the music industry. And there's a lot of rejection, a lot of things. When you're trying new things, that all builds great character and great art.
It does. But you know what's interesting with this too, though? Okay. So knowing what you stand for, stand up for it. And then all of a sudden, at first it may not take, but then all of a sudden it does take. And then all of a sudden you're like this genius. And then everybody's copying you and everybody's trying to do what you're doing. And then you run into that conundrum.
Yeah.
And do you continue doing what you're doing, or do you have to adapt and then do something else?
Yeah, this is a question for every business in every sector. So
Yeah.
one thing uh, called FMA, first mover advantage, right?
Okay.
If you can be the first person in an industry or in a world, whatever that world is, to do something, everything is contextual, right? So the first person to do something is an innovative genius. The third person to do something is on the front lines. The 10th person is a copycat. The 100th person is just normal. The 1,000th person, it's totally old fashioned. The 10,000th person, well, now it's retro, right?
Yeah.
It's coming
That's
back.
right. That's right.
So,
I remember the
uh, you do have to have courage to lead, or to have a vision, or to get off the beaten path. But from my perspective, it takes more courage to not do that, to compete for all the same gigs in the same way, to be in the rat race, to do everything that everyone else is doing, and just constantly hoping that you're going to win the lottery. For me, that is actually, on a larger level, that is way riskier than it's not just about risk taking that entrepreneurs do. It's very calculated risk taking, being strategic about things. You don't know if it's going to work, but you're also not just throwing your money and your time away.
Yeah. And it's interesting the way you phrase that, the way you phrase that with people competing for the same audiences, and you're phrasing that as more risk. And actually, like I've always thought of that. A friend of mine had said something along the lines of, you know, let's use weight loss, for example. All right, well, if you want to lose weight, you know, isn't it harder to keep doing what you're doing? And you know what I mean? It's easier to, do the new things that you need to do. It's harder to do what you keep doing because of the
Hmm.
ramifications that can keep happening from that. And so it's kind of the same thing. If you're in a town where there are a whole bunch of, let's say, cover bands and stuff, and you're all doing the same stuff, you may think it's easy, just keep doing what you're doing, but it's actually harder in the long
Yeah,
run.
yeah. That's the big difference between imitators and innovators is we both look at the competition, but innovators look at the competition to understand in some ways what not to do. Imitators look what to do. So I have a rule I've coined, I call it the 97% rule. And it just states that in just about every sector, around 97% of people and organizations make surprisingly similar decisions. So if you can just be in the 3% in one or two ways, your career can take off. You can be wildly successful. And you could look at any sector really to find that. Look at restaurants. 97% of restaurants are a carbon copy of one another. They might have different cuisines or different price points, but they basically all operate the same way, 97% of them. And the 3% that are different usually are hopping all the time.
You know what that reminds me of? And this is going back into the 90s when the Rainforest Cafe first came out.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget this too. I was playing marching bands on trumpet, and they opened up a Rainforest Cafe in Westbury, which is where I lived, and it was being constructed, and the main focus of that restaurant, it was an experience. It had an interesting menu, but it was more the experience of it. It's like you were in a rainforest, and all the the background noises, the waterfalls, these animals moving throughout. It was an experience. It was something really different. And so when that opened, everybody was really excited to go there, So it just reminds me of that. And I have a memory of that too, because I remember playing this is just just off in left field, but I was playing a parade in Westbury. It was like 104 degrees in New York with humidity, and I had suffered heat stroke. and
Oh, no.
and thank God at the end, the Rainforest Cafe saw I wasn't the only one, and they let a bunch of us in, and they were giving us water and air conditioning. Thank God for that. That was one of my memories from Rainforest Cafe. But I do remember when they first came out, and it was really exciting to go there. And then recently, I had traveled somewhere where there was a Rainforest Cafe. I'm like, I've got to go, because they don't have one by me now.
Yeah.
It's just
one of
different.
the many benefits of rainforests.
That's right. That's
But,
right.
it really comes to, it really comes to the issue of demand. And one of the things that, demand is the whole game, if you think about it. If you want to get people to your show, if you want to fill your studio, if you want to get elected, if you want to get married, meet someone to get married, whatever it is, demand is the whole game. And it's really important to understand the marketplace in which you're operating and make your decisions accordingly. So there really are three marketplaces, the way that I think about it.
Okay.
Three questions. I'll say them and then we can go through them. So how do you create demand where there's a lot of demand, which is quite easy, but not that common, right? When everyone needs the saxophone and there aren't that many saxophonists, how do you create demand? Pretty easy, not common. Second question, how do you create demand in a highly competitive environment, which is quite common and not that easy? And then the third is, how do you create demand when there is no demand whatsoever, right? When nobody cares about that thing that you do, how do you create demand, which is probably where the most opportunities lie? Because if you can just get some people to care, you would have a monopoly over their attention.
Okay.
So to go,
can I
yes,
interject? Because this is
please.
interesting. Because I've always learned in business that, if there's no demand, don't make the product. Don't go there because there's no demand. So you're saying something I think that's a little bit different.
Yeah, Ben Zander, do you know Ben Zander? He's a conductor.
No.
Wrote a book called The Art of Possibility. And he tells a story in there about a shoe salesperson who is shipped off to Africa. And so he's in this village and he looks around and nobody's wearing shoes. So he just goes home. He's so depressed. How can you sell shoes when nobody wears them? So they send someone else. It's like, oh my gosh, nobody wears shoes. Eureka, I've hit it. Because it turns out that shoes have a lot of value, especially to people that don't wear them, right? You can change their life in a very positive way. So all you have to do is convince them your life is going to be better off with shoes. And all of a sudden, you have a monopoly of attention.
Okay. Got it.
So the idea behind this, how do you create demand when there's a lot of demand? If everyone needs what you do, it's pretty easy. You're not automatically going to get the work. First, people have to know you exist. So I say be present and be cool, because people don't want to hire a jerk. Even if they need the saxophonist, there aren't many. You're a really great player, but really hard to work with. I might just hire a clarinetist instead, or just leave that position unfilled than working with someone I don't like. But that's the easier one. Just show up. And showing up can mean showing up online. It can mean showing up in person. It can mean just calling someone every once in a while so they remember you. How do you create demand in a highly competitive marketplace? Well, my solution to that is I say be purple, which actually references a Seth Godin book called Purple Cow. But the idea of purple is highly differentiated. So, when you're talking about the scenario we were just addressing, where everyone's going after these same gigs, I mean, otherwise you're just going to get a fair share of the pie. You have to have something that's really distinctive about you versus everyone else. And then the last category, how do you create demand when there's no demand whatsoever? You got to be valuable. Fill a gap. If people don't care about the thing that you're doing, figure out what they do care about and connect to that. So the doctors may not inherently care about music in the way that you're, or jazz, or, world, whatever it is you happen to play, but if you design something that they do and you're going to address issues for the medical field, or even just talk about it or something, it might connect with something. Well, I like my field, I'm interested in that, and that might be enough. So to figure out what is, if you go into, because as we said earlier, music is great for storytelling, building community. So, if you go into a town and they really care about football, there might be an opportunity in there. If you go into a business and they really care about profits, you could help them with that. And there's so many ways to do it once you've identified that problem. Do you use music as instruction to make metaphors for how they can earn more profits? Do you celebrate? I don't know. There can be lots of ways to approach any issue.
And that's where the creativity comes from. That's where the creativity comes from, for sure. You touched upon a little bit like time management, and you also equated, like project management. But in terms of time management, what else can you share, with us? A lot of musicians are, well, because they're following what everybody else is doing in a sense, right? So they're exhausted, they're worn out, and they may be thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to have the time to do all this stuff? What do you, because you teach at University of South Carolina, right? So like, what do you instruct your students to do when it comes to time management?
Well, there are a lot of time management techniques that you can talk to other people about, making lists and the Pomodoro technique and all those kinds of things. So there are a lot of those things that are readily available, and those are important. And I think a lot about those things at work, and schedule my schedule and all those kinds of things. But what is talked about less is this project management thing. So let me go into some more depth there. Yeah. Which is, the concept of compound interest in the stock market, right, is that money grows exponentially over time, right? So it's not just about how much money you put into the stock market, it's about how much time it has to grow. So you could put 5 times as much money over 10 years and it will grow less than if you have a fifth that amount of money and you have 40 years or whatever it is, right? The same is true with opportunities, right? So the sooner you start making strategic decisions, like really wise decisions, or building something, the better off you will be, because it takes time. Most overnight successes took decades to get there, right? And so that's the first thing I would say is don't wait. Whatever your age is, wherever you are in your career, if you want a different result, start thinking today about, what can I do that would really matter, that would really, impact audiences, and that can help me reach whatever my definition of success is. I think that the main, we're talking about investing. So one of the words we use in investing is portfolio. And of course, your portfolio of stock options these are all the different things that I own. The most common career model for musicians, we call it portfolio career, which is a multiple income stream career. You do more than one thing, which is what almost all of us do. And the great thing about that is, I mean, it's super fun. You meet new people, you learn new skills. I mean, I think it would be. Have you ever heard the saying, "Go to school and get a job"? To me, that just sounds terrible. Why would anyone want one job? You go, for some people, it's right. You work for Ford for 40 years and then you retire. But as a creative musician, no, thank you. I don't want a job. I want to do all these things. But the biggest challenge for us is you're juggling all these projects and keeping up in the air.
Yeah.
So I think one thing that's really important is you're making good decisions. And I don't always follow this advice, is to build projects that amplify one another rather than compete against one another.
Okay, interesting.
Right? So that with each effort, you're exponentially expanding your impact rather than just diluting your attention and your life work. So part of it is, so for example, I mean, if you were really wanted to become known as a musician that cares about doctors, and really it could be like a cause, it could be a identity, it could be a way of collaborating, whatever it is, to begin building that identity through a whole bunch of different things. And you could, maybe there's a teaching part of your business where I guess you could teach any student, but you really focus on doctors, right? Everyone's going to come to you, especially if you teach online. You could fill your studio like this. How many teachers are there that just focus on doctors, right? And you get, I'm actually a doctor, by the way. I'm Dr. Cutler, different kind of doctor. But you can play off of that if you want to. And then I'm just using doctor because that's what we talked about before today, right? And so to be building a whole bunch of things that kind of stack on top of one another. And so you kind of create this empire of something that's very specific, but goes in every direction imaginable, as opposed to having, I play in a wedding band and I teach lessons, but the wedding band has nothing to do with the lessons and the lessons have nothing to do with the wedding band, right? And then I'm going to do a new concert that I think is interesting that's in the art museum that uses art and music. And then I'm going to, sell saxophone case. I mean, these are all great things, but they're not really related to one another except for Yeah. And if you could find a way to build them in a way that goes together, it could be extraordinary.
And you're not necessarily talking about building a brand. You could be, but you're not necessarily talking about building a brand unless you have this one great idea.
Yeah, I mean, certainly that can help you build a brand or get known for something. And that's what a brand is. A brand is what you are known for, right? That's, I know some people are less comfortable with these businessy terms, but that's all it means. It just means you're known for something. And so, you're known for Everything Saxophone, and so if you had a side hustle that was about flutes or golfers, it just might not make sense. But on the other hand, if you were Everything Saxophone and then you did Everything Saxophone concerts at golf tournaments, because a soprano saxophone in a golf club looks similar, or something like that, maybe get it right, that could explode. And that makes sense under your framework. So that is you think about it like your brand, right?
Yeah, right.
And so in that, it's really important if you're establishing an identity also, to say what you are and what you aren't, which Everything Saxophone does.
Tuba players,
but it can also tie your hands. So for example, I wrote a book. My first book was called The Savvy Musician. It's a different book from The Savvy Musician 2.0, which is like the sequel. And I started throwing this event. I called it The Savvy Musician in Action, which was like a boot camp for, I actually call it an innovation game for musicians. But we started to expand. And innovation most often comes when you take an idea from one place and apply it somewhere else. So I was like, well, we need more people. Musicians in some ways are different, and in some ways we all think the same way. We're just musicians. But you bring in a visual artist, they think in a different way. So musicians have a lot to learn from visual artists. Visual artists have a lot to learn from musicians. So I started bringing in dancers and theater people and stuff like that. But it was kind of hard to make a compelling argument that The Savvy Musician in Action is for you as a dancer, right? because my brand kind of suggested that it wasn't. So you sometimes people put on handcuffs around their geography or something like that, right? Well, I serve Cleveland. Well, then if you're not from Cleveland, you're probably not a great customer for me or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's important when you're thinking about how you want to shape that, because when you're not known, you can change it easily, but when you are known, it is hard to change your identity and the way that people perceive you. So to figure out what that identity might be, to the degree that you can shape it.
That's a great point. And would you say, because you do teach in college, right? And I'm just thinking about your students, are they encouraged to think about their brand, so to speak, in your classes?
Here's what I've noticed is that students today are not nervous talking about business terms. They're not nervous about that word. Sometimes some of my colleagues are, but students are not. They're totally fine talking about marketing and saying they don't want to be poor. They want to, they want to
That's
make
great.
it happen. But when it comes to, getting under the hood and what does that mean? Here's something that I found, and maybe not just for students, maybe for many of us as musicians, but I found if you ask a student, certainly, what makes you good or not good, they can give you a detailed dissertation on what they're doing well and what they need to improve on. But if you ask, what makes you interesting? It's like deer in the headlights.
Interesting.
In a world oversaturated with saxophonists or whatever it is, what you I like to overstate things, but you can look under any rock and you find a saxophonist running around. There are lots of saxophone, which is great because saxophone is wonderful. But what makes you interesting in a world oversaturated with them? Why you? And for many of us, that's a really hard question to answer, unless it's a really easy question to answer. So there's a whole chapter in Savvy Musician 2.0 just looking at that particular question. And there are a whole bunch of ways to be interesting, a whole bunch of ways to do that. But to really think about what is it that makes you stand out?
And yeah, and that's, it's a really important question. And, I'm going to give an example of someone who definitely started, actually two people. I'm going to start with Derek Brown, felt himself as a run-of-the-mill saxophone player at University of North Texas, great player, but he realized he was a dime a dozen. And then one day he was going to the library, said, "Oh, I'm just going to listen to world music." And he starts listening to it. And he's like, "Wow, how can I recreate these types of different sounds on the saxophone?" And then what evolved, he didn't call himself the beatbox sax. Someone else called him that. And it stuck. And he said, "I don't really like that name, but okay, but it stuck. Fine." And so he's the guy that, created all these different type of percussive effects with his playing, with his producing the sound, but also percussive effects on the instrument, and then using his feet to stomp and singing. And it created a whole new, other way of playing saxophone, created a
Yeah.
kind of a movement, right? So that's one way to stand out for sure. And then
And
I
he
think
had an FMA in the sax world, first mover advantage, right? Because he was the first guy that did it.
absolutely, absolutely. And another person, Leo P, right? Leo P on the Barry. So now Leo P, really nice guy, humble guy, again, great player, Manhattan School of Music, again, realizing dime a dozen. And then he was playing with this band, Too Many Zoos. They would play in the subways, right? So, they had tremendous popularity doing that. But what he was starting to do was do these crazy dance moves with his legs. I mean, that guy must be made out of rubber because I can't see anybody be able to move their legs that way. And he's playing a Barry sax, right? Which is big. So he's dancing, he's doing kicks when he's playing. He's moving his legs in such a way that, it's cool and it's crazy. And he inspired so many people to play the Barry sax, especially young kids who was always like, "Oh, no, the Barry sax. Are you kidding me? That thing's too heavy." He made it cool,
Yeah.
right? And that's somebody that inspired a brand. And what's interesting, Grace Kelly, who's an incredible saxophone player, very good singer too. She's won awards, and she also has a dance background. And so, she started to collaborate with Leo, and they started to do these videos on YouTube where they would be doing like these not only just playing, but acting out these scenes, with dancing and all these moves. And they created a movement. So I'm just thinking about people that have first movers, right? First mover advantage, but also, yeah, created branding, created something really compelling,
Yeah.
you know?
So as you're saying that, so here's another term for you. Here's another acronym for you. BTE, barriers to entry. So you asked a question earlier, how do you keep people from, when you have a great idea, just coming and taking your idea? And of course, you can't patent dancing and playing the saxophone or whatever it is. So it's interesting. And you asked, you have to always innovate. And you might, Apple has to always innovate, and that's how they stay relevant. And if they don't, then they're less relevant.
Right.
But there are different ways to. So a barrier to entry, what it means is it's like a moat, moat like on a
Yeah.
castle, right? And you want to protect your castle. So what can you do to, you put you put, shards of glass around it and alligators and stuff like that to protect your castle, not because you're not generous, but you don't want someone to come and just take your business idea. When you combine multiple skills, that is kind of a barrier to entry, because there are lots of people who dance. There are lots of people who play Barry. But put them together, and not many people can have that combination of two things. So one way to do it is and what's amazing to me, sometimes you meet these multi-talents. Like I knew a singer and a pianist. He's a good pianist, not the best in the world, but a good pianist, and a good singer, but not Pavarotti or anything like that. He had some money notes or whatever it is. And so he had two lives right here. This is projects that are not stacked on top of one another. He was a pianist and he got his fair share of the work. And then he was a singer and he got his fair share of the work and was still struggling to make it happen. Yet never thought of combining the two. Can you imagine being at a piano recital and all of a sudden the pianist breaks into this amazing aria? It's going to change your life. The last day of your life, you're going to be like, that was a life well lived. Do you remember when I was at that piano concert and that aria, poof, you're dead, right? Your last thought. It's so cool and very difficult to emulate, for most of us. So if you have multiple talents, maybe build your identity in that way.
What would you say we're talking a lot about performers, right? But what about music teachers?
Yeah, what about them? Love
So,
them.
okay,
Do it. Those who can, teach.
that's right. Those who can, that's right.
You don't need bad teachers.
Okay, so for them to stand out. And I know like some parts of the book, and like I do this myself, I have systems. I have systems for everything. I have systems for improvisation, systems for practicing, systems for embouchure, systems for, helping with practicing so you don't have performance anxiety. Systems can be a way, but how can teachers differentiate themselves?
So I answer a couple of ways. In a way, so I read another book called The Savvy Music Teacher. And similarly, I had all these vignettes and all instruments, all parts of the world and things like that. And what I found was disproportionately, I wrote these stories in a way so that if I did my job, it doesn't matter what you play. It's irrelevant. It's just that you could take this lesson. And what I found, the way in which it was least diverse, trying to get different geographies, different backgrounds, different things like that, different instruments, was that there was way more innovation happening among pianists, piano teachers, not piano performers, piano teachers than any other instrument.
Interesting.
I don't know why that was, even though the innovations had nothing to do with 88 keys. You could just as easily do that in a saxophone studio. I would say this though, in a way, the problem that you're talking about, like an independent teacher.
It could, yeah, let's say an independent teacher. Let's do it like that way.
So in a way, an independent teacher doesn't really need to differentiate themselves because their challenge is a lot easier than performers in the sense that, you want to build up a studio of like 30 students or something like that. The hardest time to get there is just when you're starting. But once you have it, student graduates, student moves on, they recommend someone else. So the marketing challenge is not as tricky. There's another problem for independent teachers. So, I mean, there are lots of things you could do to make your education more impactful, right? But I want to address a different point, which is that, there is an elephant in the room. There's an elephant at the saxophone when it comes to independent music teachers, which is, even though we have across our industry, we have different instruments, different pedagogies, different levels, different all these things. But it seems like one thing we all agree on is that the best way to learn music is working one-on-one for 30 to 60 minutes a week with someone who plays the same instrument that you do. And we can dissect each part of that. But the elephant at the saxophone is this, that it's an incredibly inefficient way to work. Now, there are a lot of great things about private lessons, but you have only one of you. If we only see one student at a time, I mean, you just can't get more efficient. You will never get so good that you can tell your students, if you charge by the hour, I'm so good, you paid me for an hour, but I'm so good, I'm going to deliver all that content in 33 minutes. Right? That's how good I am. Right? No, they're not paying for your knowledge or your wisdom. They're paying for your time. And so one place I would encourage independent music teachers to think about is, are there ways you might become more efficient in terms of your delivery system? And there are many, many ways to do this. I actually just did a keynote for MTNA focused specifically on this issue, and I unveiled 12 strategies for doing that. But essentially, without going into them unless you want me to, but let's say your rate is $1 a minute, so $60 per hour. That might be a great rate, or that might be a terrible rate, depending on where you live, but just to make the math easy. So a good creative challenge would be to figure out, well, how do you make it, and money is not everything, but how do you make it more than $1 per hour? And for me, I always look at not just income, but also impact and also inspiration. The subtitle of my book is about amplifying income, impact, and inspiration, right? So all those things go hand in hand, but there are ways to become more efficient in your teaching where you're making more money and making more impact at the same time, right? You become a better teacher. Your students have more enjoyment out of it. They get deeper learning. You have more students that you work with, and you make more money in less time. Like, that's a pretty good model. So maybe that's what I would encourage. You could innovate and have a unique teaching approach or something like that. But maybe I'll challenge the independent teachers out there. Figure out if there are ways you can become more efficient with your business model in terms of how you execute teaching.
And actually, that's what I'm doing. I mean, I have my Improvisation Made Easy Elite coaching group. So I could have the impact all over the world. And so I could work with a small group of people that, want to improve, want to get better at improvisation, and not, I'm not just teaching one person per hour, but I'm teaching in a small group, and people learn better in small groups. And
they can learn from each other. There's peer learning and teaching that's more fun. It's more social.
Yep. It's the whole 9 yards. And that's a change that I've made over the last few years. And that's definitely, impact for sure. And it's inspiring. And also people have made friends with people that they never would have done before as well. There's a social implications for this as well. So that's definitely, a model that I absolutely, profess. It's great, and people, especially after COVID, the community aspect of everything, when we were so isolated. So, I think definitely, this is something that people need to consider, because people do, when you think about it, people do learn. When we were growing up learning an instrument, did you learn better from the teacher, or at times did you learn better from the kid that was a year or two older than you and watching them go through what they went through? I know that happened for me, on trumpet.
Or a year or two younger than you. Who was playing better than you. Yeah.
Oh, gosh. That way too. Yeah, for sure. For sure. But listen, David, I'm just going to say this. This book is incredible. And I really wish that this was out when I was in college. And I'm hoping, we had spoken briefly about this, but I'm hoping that colleges will, number one, have more music business courses or music career. I don't know, not career, but I'm going to say music business courses. This would be in a music business courses. This would be the curriculum for music business because you cover everything, every possible, stone has been, taken up, and I think that this is an incredible book for everybody to learn. But I'm hoping that colleges, will help promote this as well. But where can we get this book? Where can we find it online?
The easy answer, and I can share some things you can put in links, but the easy answer, you can go to Amazon or Barnes and Noble or anywhere that books are sold. My website is savvymusician.com, SAVVY musician.com. I would just say, all of these terms are really weighted. Music business in a lot of communities means a very specific thing, which is people working in the music industry. And we are all in the music business. So sometimes these courses are called music entrepreneurship or career perspectives, but if I had to summarize it in one word, my title here is in innovation entrepreneurship. But if I had to say what is the most important word, it would be this: success. And that's truly what I wish for you and all of your listeners.
That's awesome. And that's a great way to end the show. David, it was so great having you on the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You're an absolute joy to speak with.
Hey, everybody. Today's podcast was brought to you by our good friends at Gig Salad. Gig Salad is a service I've been using for many years. Now, if you're looking to book more gigs and grow your audience as a saxophone player, whether you're a solo artist or in a band, Gig Salad makes it easy to connect with event planners across the US and Canada for weddings, birthday parties, corporate events, funerals, you name it. With Gig Salad's strong Google presence, you get better exposure to planners looking for your talent. The full service platform lets you set availability preferences to get only the leads that you want, and it makes messaging, quoting, and booking a breeze. And best of all, clients pay up front. Your money's guaranteed every time. So head on over to Gig Salad, that's GIGSALAD.com. Create your free profile now. Take that first step to booking more shows. That's gigsalad.com. And please let them know that the Everything Saxophone Podcast sent you.